Let's take a look at Chapter 6. This is the second half of a set of chapters dealing with costing of the products as they move through the manufacturing process. In the last chapter, we talked about job costing, which was taking the work in process account and breaking it down into individual jobs and tracking the costs by those jobs. The nice thing about that is when it came to looking at the work in process account, determining how much needed to leave work in process and go to finished goods, it wasn't a problem. We knew exactly which jobs had been finished and were being moved to finished goods, and we had been tracking the costs for those jobs on the job sheets. Now, when we get into process costing, and remember, process costing is used by manufacturers who make the same product over and over and over again. So as they go through that process, they have direct materials, direct labor, overhead. It's just going into the whole process. It's piling up for the whole month, let's say. So if this was the beginning inventory left over from the prior month, things that were still in process when last month ended, this month begins, those items are laying there on the assembly line waiting to be finished. Some more products are started with materials, labor, overhead. These are used to finish up the old products and to make new products. And a bunch of the products leave the assembly line and go over to finished goods. But some remain unfinished and are going to roll into next month. We can count the number of units that went over to finished goods, but how do you figure out the dollar amount that those units represent? That's what this whole chapter is about, is trying to find out of all this cost, these costs that are here, which is $92,500 worth of costs, how did they figure out that $88,500 was the amount that related to the products that were finished, and that $4,000 is the cost of the ones still here? That can be a little tricky. So we're going to take a look at some examples and learn to do a production report. So process costing is trying to do the same thing. It's trying to track what's happening in work in process and move the stuff to finished goods, just as job order costing was, but it does it in a different way because it's a different type of production and a different type of record keeping. We're going to take a look at an exercise to kind of lay out the simplest form, and then we're going to build from there. Okay, we're going to look at exercise 22 on page 264. It tells us that the manufacturing company had no beginning work in process. We're looking at the number of units in process. They had 0 at the beginning of the month. During the month, they completed 70,000 products. And the ending work in process $10,500 units at the end of the month. The way we're going to organize this information in our production reports is we're going to say units in beginning work in process, which is 0. And then we're going to talk about the units started this month. We're going to say you had this many that you're working on, and you started some more. All together, they represent the units to be accounted for. Then we're going to come over to the other side and account for them. We're going to say these many were completed, and these are ending work in process. So still in process at the end of the month. When we do that, we say that 70,000 were completed. We had 10,500 still in process. So altogether, we had 80,500 products that were in process at some point during the month. And out of the 80,500, 70,000 of them moved on to finished goods. These guys are still in work in process at the end of the month. So our job is going to be to try to figure out the dollar amount that represents the cost of the 70,000 products that moved to finished goods. But before we do that, we got to finish our chart. We know we had no inventory. There were no partially done. The assembly room floor was completely empty when the month began. We must have started everything that we worked on. So we must have started 80,500 to give us a grand total of 80,500 to account for, and we just accounted for them. So we've explained where the 80,500 went to. Big chunk of them, 70,000 of them left and went to finished goods because they got completely done. We started them this month, and we went all the way through the assembly process and finished them. But a few, 10,500 of the ones that we started this month didn't get finished. If this problem had asked you to go farther, the objective, I guess is a good way to say it, would be to determine the costs associated with the 70,000 units and transfer that cost, that total cost to finished goods, leaving in work in process the costs associated with the 10,500 units that are only partially finished at the end of the accounting period. This problem doesn't ask you to go any farther. That's just dealing with the very first step of making the production report, is getting our heads wrapped around how many units came in and got started, how many were here in the beginning, how many have left. There's going to be so many numbers thrown at you in some of these story problems about how many units are going this way and that way, that this is the format you're going to want to set them up in so that you can get a handle around the flow of the physical units. Let's look at another problem just to figure out the physical units. Then we can work on all the other steps of the production report. Okay, just a couple exercises down. We're going to do exercise 625. And again, we're going to create this little spreadsheet. So obviously we don't know any of the numbers yet until we read the story problem. So I'm going to leave those out and we'll start reading. Exercise 25 says that the company's in its second month of production. And at December 1st, the month we're talking about, there were 100,000 units in beginning inventory. Then it also says that we completed and transferred out 475,000 units. Probably a chunk of those are the 100,000 that we started this month, or that we had brought over from the prior month. So the first thing that probably would have come off the assembly line is those ones that were partially done that came in from November, were sitting here when December began. They would be the first ones finished. But they weren't the only thing finished, because we finished 475,000 products. So we must have started a bunch more and finished those too. The last thing it tells us is that at the end of December, there are still 75,000 units that are not finished. So there are really 550,000 units that flowed through our department. How many did we start? A big hint is that we need to make these guys equal. The units to be accounted for and the units we accounted have to equal. So right now I only have 100,000, but this total's got to be 550,000. So it must be 450,000 units. Now let's see if that makes sense. The 100,000 we figure got completed. But there were also 375,000 that got completed that didn't come from beginning inventory. They must have come from what we started. And there were 75 that were not finished, but they must have been started during the month of December. So 375 plus 75 is 450 is another way to look at it. So just remember, these have to balance, and they'll give you enough to fill in 3 of the spots. You have to figure in the 4th. Generally, that's the one you're going to need to fill in, but I can't guarantee that. Some problems might give you a different set of 3. But this is the area we're going to focus on the most, because these are the ones we're trying to track the cost for. These costs need to go. The costs related to 475,000 units need to get transferred out of work in process and to finished goods. And then the costs related to the 75,000 need to stay in work in process until those units are finished, and then those costs can transfer out with the units. So that's kind of the objective. And that's called a physical flow schedule. It's the beginning of our production report. So that's really exciting and nice that we figured out the physical flow. We've got to figure out how to start playing with the numbers and the dollar amounts. One of the things we have to do is look at what's called equivalent units. Let me give you an example. We have 100,000 units that were already somewhat in process. According to the story problem, they were 80% done when December began. So we only have to do 20% more of the work on those products to finish them up. We're most of the way, 4/5 the way done when the month began. So we need to maybe put a little more materials on them, you know, the finishing pieces on them, spend just a little more labor and overhead on them, and we can have those guys done. Where the other 450 here, remember it's 2, that's broken up into 2 groups. Part of that 450 got completed. 375 out of the 450 were started in December and went through the whole entire assembly process and got finished. They got all their materials, all their labor, all their overhead, and now they're done and they've moved to finished goods. And then another group of them out of here is 75,000 that went on to be, according to our problem, 60% done. So they have 60% of the processing done to finish them. And next month they'll have to do some more. So if we work our way through that, we can say that the beginning inventory, let's just back up a little bit from this. Equivalent units says that we didn't spend the same amount of time on each of these. But we're going to try to make it equal. If I do 100 units and I get them 50% done, we say that's equivalent to getting 50 units 100% done. That may seem a little strange, but if I get halfway done on 100 different products, 100 different units, that's the same amount of time that it would have taken me to do 50 products from beginning to end. Or 200 units that I did 40% of the work on would be the same as doing 80 units all the way. I'm multiplying the number of units by the percentage that I did for them. So we say that 100 units half done is the same as 50 equivalent units. 200 units 40% done is the same as 80 equivalent units. Why do I care? Because I can determine the cost it costs me to make one product, like how much labor does it take to do a whole product, by using equivalent units, and I can turn that into a dollar amount. So our second step in our production report, and you'll see the steps for them, are talked about on page 242. And the first one is to do a physical flow schedule, which we did up here in exercise 25. But the second step is to calculate equivalent units. And to do that, we're going to look at the production report on page 245. When you do it, you're going to focus on the completed and ending work in process. So you're going to take the number of completed units and their percentage done, and you're going to come up with their equivalent units. And you're going to do the same thing with ending work in process. How many units are in ending in work in process? What percent done are they? And turn that into equivalent units. And then we're going to come up with a grand total of equivalent units. So let's see if we can find some numbers to work that out with. Find an example exercise that we can practice computing equivalent units. We can look at exercise 26. It's the one we're just staying right in line with the stuff we were doing. Exercise 626 on page 264. And the first step is to figure out the physical flow. So we're going to do this. I know I've been doing this a lot, but it's that important that we keep practicing these steps. Your homework is going to have you practice them over and over again. So I'm going to read exercise 26, looking to fill in this little chart of physical flow. Then when we get this chart, we're going to take this information and turn it into equivalent units. So the problem says, in process at October 1st are 10,000 units. Then it says completed and transferred out, 68,000. In process at the end, 20,000. So again, they gave me 3 out of the 4. I know these two have to equal, so this has to be 78,000 so that the total can become 88 and those two can equal. While it's nice that I was able to come up with that number, all I really want is this here. I'm going to turn that into our equivalent unit calculation. So I'm bringing down all the stuff we were doing up there, and we're going to figure out how many equivalent units this represents. And since I didn't line that up correctly, let's move these guys over and put in the percentage done. If they're completed and transferred out to finished goods, then they must be 100% done. That it won't be stated in the problem, but it's understood that by the definition of finished and completed, they are 100% done. So we're going to multiply them by 100% and the same number will show up here. The ending is the one that's going to have a percentage done, and that'll vary with every problem. In this problem, it turns out that they are 60% completed. So we have 20,000 units that are 60% complete is the same as making 12,000 units from beginning to end. So we have 68,000 equivalent units from the stuff that got transferred out and 12,000 from the ending inventory. So we say we have 80,000 equivalent units. And from that, I can turn it into how much did we spend to make these products. And the step number 3 looks at the costs. Let's see how they phrased it, but that's the idea. Computation of unit cost. So what were our costs? Well, we had some beginning work in process. So there was some money in work in process, some cost already there. According to the story problem, it was 80,000 in beginning work in process. Then during the month, we added a whole bunch more. So October costs, that would be materials, labor, overhead. They didn't differentiate them. They just gave us the grand total of all those costs together, $1,520,000. So the grand total that was spent on all these products to make all these products during October was $1.6 million. Divide the cost by the total equivalent units. So 1,600,000 divided by 80,000 equivalent units. Y is just a little too close to the T on the keyboard. And we get nothing if you don't do the division, right? $20 per equivalent unit. So we get a per unit rate. Why do we care? I'm going to keep coming back to that. Why do we care? We care because the whole objective that we're trying to do is to figure out of all these units we've been playing around with, we said that 68,000 units moved on to finished goods. We have to grab the amount of money that relates to those 68,000 and move that to finished goods. Well, how do we figure that out? Now we know that every unit that moves over to finished goods is $20. So transfer $20 per completed unit to finished goods. So that's 68,000 units times $20 per unit. So we're going to move over 1.3 million to finished goods. Just for the sake of understanding, if we had 1.6 million in work in process and 1.3 is removed, remains in work in process because it is the cost of the, I forgot how many units, 20,000 units in ending work in process. So we figured out that 240,000 is the approximate cost of the 20,000 units that are still in ending work in process. They are not $20 a piece yet. Because what we're saying is when a unit is completely done, has all its materials, labor, and overhead, that piles up to $20 a unit. But these ones that are in ending work in process are only 60% done. So they only have 60% of their $20, which is $12. And if you look at the math, that's exactly what it's in here for. It's $12 a unit. So now we've solved the mystery that we were trying to do up in the beginning. Our objective is to determine the costs associated with the units that are transferred to finished goods. This was a different story, so it was 70,000 units in that case. But our objective is always to determine the costs associated with the units that are transferred to finished goods and how much of the cost should remain in work in process for the partially done units that will roll over to the next period. So the whole chapter is a building of step-by-step trying to determine the process costing production report that walks us through all the costs accumulating and determining which ones need to go to finished goods.